We'd like to thank Cloud Foundry, our sponsor, for these podcasts from Cloud Foundry Summit in Frankfurt, Germany. Cloud Foundry gives companies the speed, simplicity, and control they need to develop and deploy applications faster and easier. It's open source, easy to iterate, and built to scale. Learn more at cloudfoundry.org. Hey, it's Alex Williams of the New Stack here at Cloud Foundry Summit in Frankfurt with my co-host Job Jackson. Hey, Job. And we're joined right now with Colleen, Briant, and Eric Johnson of Google. Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. We wanted to talk with you a little bit about Bosh and your guys' perspective on Bosh and a little bit about Cloud Foundry on Google Cloud Platform. So perhaps we can start with your work on Bosh and what you're doing.
Sure, so we got involved in this, I'd say about 6 months ago, working on a Bosh CPI for Google Cloud Platform. And this was work that one of the Pivotal engineers had originally started as a side project. So we ended up finding the project and picking it up and polishing it off. And right now, I'd say we're pretty close to calling it done. There's always more features that you can add. But generally it supports all of the main CPI level functions that you would need in terms of spinning up VMs, working with our load balancers, interfacing with Google Cloud metadata service for communicating between VMs and the Bosh director. So a lot of good tight integration there between Google Cloud Platform and the Bosh CPI.
So Colleen, what's your role? What's your role in this development?
So I joined the team just about 3 months ago and immediately started working on a service broker, a Cloud Foundry service broker for GCP services. So starting out with Cloud SQL storage, BigQuery, machine learning APIs, and PubSub. So just wrapping up that initial release pretty soon, and hoping to kind of get it out and then start iterating with feedback from the community.
So tell us more about then the service broker then. It sounds like it's like an integration of a kind of a multitude of APIs within it.
Yeah, so the Cloud Foundry service broker basically just enables those GCP services to be used natively within Cloud Foundry. So instead of having to go to the console, which developers maybe don't even have access to, or to request somebody else to create these services and do all this configuration, developers can just create the instances and bind them for their application development. So probably one of the most useful applications, I think, is Cloud SQL. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work to configure databases and set up users and the authentication. That just makes it a lot simpler through the service broker.
Terrific, thanks. Well, first of all, what is CPI?
That's a cloud provider interface. So it's the abstraction that allows Bosh to speak to other cloud providers. So it's a relatively new model. I think the original Bosh was more of a monolithic application, but they did some re-architecture and created these cloud provider interfaces, make it easier for other cloud providers to come along and just provide the abstraction for speaking to our specific cloud up through Bosh.
And I understand it because of the work that Colleen is doing, it is really easy to use Bosh to enable a Cloud Foundry deployment. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think the Bosh side of things is what allows Cloud Foundry to be installed on top of a cloud provider. So the Bosh CPI will spin up virtual machines for Cloud Foundry. And the work that Colleen is doing is more about exposing Google Cloud Services to the application developers that would push their apps out onto CF.
I like to remember it as Bosh is like PCF on GCP, and the service broker is like GCP on CF.
Excellent. But it's not limited to Cloud Foundry. I guess you could use this to set up other complex PaaS or even infrastructure as a service deployments.
Yeah, I think so. The work that Colleen is doing with the service broker, what's a little bit different about that from the Bosh CPI. So the Bosh CPI is only Google specific, right? It's just for running Cloud Foundry or a Bosh Director on top of GCP.
All right.
The service broker work allows any Cloud Foundry installation or the users of those Cloud Foundry installations, whether that's on-premise or on Azure or AWS, to still interact with Google Cloud Services.
Though to your point, you could, I think, even use the service broker outside of Cloud Foundry if you wanted, because it operates through an HTTP API. So you can make calls to basically the bind service HTTP route and get authentication, for example.
Excellent. And we've been hearing a lot of buzz about Bosh at this particular conference, but I'm still kind of confused because on one hand, I'm hearing it as an orchestration engine. On the other hand, I'm hearing it more as a configuration management tool. So how could it take the place of Puppet, or how does it differ from Kubernetes?
Good questions. I think generally the way that I look at, I guess first of all I should qualify I'm not an expert on all of these technologies.
Sure.
So my perspective of this is Bosh does lifecycle management of the virtual machines and the underneath. So in the Cloud Foundry world, you'll have operating system images that are called stem cells, and Bosh will handle provisioning those VMs. The operating system image, the stem cell, has all of the bits necessary for the deployment that sits on top of it. So Cloud Foundry, for example. So there are agents that are baked into the stem cells that will allow the Bosh director to communicate and manage the VMs through that agent that's baked into the operating system image. Puppet, Chef, and some of these other configuration management tools, I look at those as more of a sort of runtime configuration and management.
Yes.
Whereas Bosh, for instance, the way that I believe that it would handle an upgrade would be to destroy and recreate. So more along the lines of immutable infrastructure management. And then that kind of gets a little bit more closer to how Kubernetes does things, where it tries to hide sort of the underlying operating system away from the application developer. So from that perspective, it's more akin to Cloud Foundry, where application developers don't really care anymore about the operating system. It's more about the environment that they're writing their applications to and then deploying to.
Is that fitting for container-based architectures?
Yeah, so both Cloud Foundry as well as Kubernetes can support containerized workloads as well as more sort of like a legacy type application.
What is some of the work then that you're doing, Colleen, like that's taking your time right now? You're saying there's a lot of pieces here that you're needing to fit together. Can you talk to us a little bit about what those are?
Sure. So the first part of the service broker work, like I said, is nearly complete, and that was first of all setting up all of the actual sort of wrappers around each service. So each service is different. What it means to provision a Cloud SQL database is very different from what it means to provision PubSub. So kind of figuring out the direction for that, and then the bits that I've been working on recently have been more just kind of getting it ready for production. So documentation and testing, and also trying to make it available for partners who want to get it through the Pivotal network. So making it into a tile and then being able to distribute that on PibNet. And then the upcoming work, there's a bunch of stuff to be done still. A lot of services to be added. I think one of the next things that's coming really quickly is going to be IAM as a service, because it seems like a lot of people are excited about that.
What's that?
Google's
Right.
identity and access management.
Okay.
So right now, the service broker is using it on bind calls to provide new sets of application credentials. But I'm hearing from a few people that they would like that functionality as a service on its own to get new sets of credentials and then sort of figure out what to do with them as they want. And that'll also be probably a good stopgap for people if there are services that they want to use with the service broker that are not yet integrated into the service broker. And then there will just be some kind of making it a little easier to use, creating names for services if you don't supply them, things like that just kind of, just making it super simple.
Terrific. So now for the average enterprise, what's the pain point that they have to hit before they start considering to use Bosh? They're like, oh, we're using all these Google services, but what's happening that would drive the enterprise to use Bosh?
So I think I would probably take that up to the higher level and just talk about Cloud Foundry in general.
Sure.
So I think the Pivotal does a good job of describing this as a digital transformation of enterprises. So typical enterprises, you'll have large IT shops where it'll sometimes take a while to provision new resources. Maybe their development or their developers would like to use a newer technology, but IT departments will have like a certification process that things need to go through. And so it can take time, right? And what that results in is like lower agility, right? So as the business wants to adapt, developers want to utilize some of these newer technologies, it can be harder for legacy IT to adapt to these changing landscape in a quick enough way. So with Cloud Foundry, it sort of unlocks the developers, right? So once that is up and running, you're sort of reducing the time that it takes for a developer to build a service and deploy it and get it out there fully managed by the platform.
Right.
What I like about this is fits in with Google's cloud strategy is that we want to be seen as an open cloud. So we don't want to try and get you locked into the platform. So the idea that an enterprise could start out on-premise with Pivotal Cloud Foundry and then start to expand out into public clouds allows those enterprises to gain the expertise within a single ecosystem, but then have the underlying infrastructure be portable or flexible in a sense that you can deploy Cloud Foundry across different cloud providers, but your application developers are still only used to interfacing with Cloud Foundry directly. So it abstracts away some of the differences between platforms. So it really is a kind of a vendor neutral, or at least a cloud provider neutral way of developing apps.
So for the developer using the platform, it doesn't really matter if it's Google underneath or Amazon, but the system administrators, they have to write separate configurations for each cloud provider, or how would that work?
That's also a little bit abstracted out with Bosh.
Oh, all right.
So Bosh provides a set of, like an API or a contract. So as long as a cloud provider, and that could be on-premise as well, supports the ability to create a virtual machine, destroy a virtual machine, then that works effectively the same across all of these. It's that CPI part that becomes unique for each cloud provider.
Huh, all right, nice.
So again, for an operator's perspective, it's also very portable in a sense. The configuration is specific for each cloud provider, but then that's just a small subset of the overall deployment for a Bosh or Bosh director. So it's just a small snippet of code that would be sort of different or unique per cloud provider, but the rest of the deployment manifest for Bosh or Bosh director stays the same.
Nice. Now you had mentioned that Bosh is nearly completed. What work still needs to be done, and at what point can it be used in production jobs? Maybe it can already, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think right now where we're at is for most of the use cases, right, the generic open source Cloud Foundry can be installed on top of Google Cloud Platform. working with Pivotal, trying to get that included in part of their operations manager product. We're discovering that there's a few other things that we could do to make improvements, such as leveraging Google Cloud's ability to put tags on virtual machines. So as you do a deployment in Cloud Foundry with Bosh, you can tag the VMs. So you can look in our web UI, for instance, and look at the tags associated with the VMs to understand what deployments all of these VMs belong to. So it's a way of making it easier for you to visually inspect where VMs live for various deployments. So it's really, I say, almost done. It's just these last sort of bits as we're working on with Pivotal or working with customers where they're actually exercising it in use cases beyond the initial developer trying to make it work. We find ways of making it better or small, minor improvements.
Is there any, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was about to say, last time I was speaking to the folks at Dozer who are also, they're building a graphical user interface. I would assume that well, tell me if I'm wrong, but like Kubernetes, Google had developed the product, but it's leaving it for other firms to kind of commercialize and take out to the marketplace. Is this a similar strategy that you're undertaking with Bosh?
I'm not entirely sure. I think that, so Pivotal has two applications that allow easier management of an entire deployment. So one of it is the operations manager. Cloud Foundry has a concept of sort of two classes of users, right? There's an operator, sort of like your system administrator.
Sure.
And so they have a product and a UI called Ops Manager or Operations Manager. And then for your application developers, there's another UI called Apps Manager. I'm not familiar with the project you're talking about, although I heard mention of it. As far as Bosh, these are generally probably not things that you would have a UI for. Bosh is more of a command line utility.
Sure.
And once you get the initial deployments of Cloud Foundry up and running, your developers are interacting either through a UI or a separate command line utility to interact just for the end user developer's point of view versus the operator's point of view.
I'm curious from, about Cloud Foundry, as a platform in itself, and it's described as an opinionated platform. And I'm curious on what challenges that brings to you in your work, or what are some of the problems it helps overcome?
One thing that I found sort of mentally challenging early on was just understanding the opinions of Cloud Foundry. Because as Eric and I were trying to kind of spec out the service broker, we were trying to figure out, well, how do you, if a developer says, I want to make 10 databases, where's the person who says you can't do that, you can only make 5? And that's where the opinionated part of Cloud Foundry comes in, where that piece isn't there. It's implicitly trusting the developer and enabling the developer. So that for me, once I kind of overcame that hurdle and really like bought into that like mission of Cloud Foundry, things kind of became a lot simpler and a lot easier to kind of execute on that.
So let me get this straight then. So is that trusting the opinion of the developer then, in that respect, in what you're describing?
Yeah, I think so. You can still set quotas, restrict machine sizes and like memory usage and things like that. So you can place these kind of loose restrictions on developers. But yeah, I think Cloud Foundry, that's kind of, the point is to enable developers, and you can't really do that without an inherent, like, huge amount of trust in them.
Mm-hmm. I was also curious about, is there a bare metal story here at all in what you guys are just talking about? Is it just, eliminating the VMs entirely?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, is there some people say that, in a container-based architecture, you don't really need the VMs whatsoever, right? You could just basically operate the infrastructure with the containers on the bare metal itself.
Oh.
And I'm just curious about, is there a story here related to that? Being Cloud Foundry and the service broker and, and Cloud Foundry running on Google itself.
Right. Yeah, so the service broker is portable. It creates GCP services, but it doesn't have to be run on GCP. So yeah, you can run it on AWS, you can run it on bare metal.
Right.
So I definitely think that if there are customers running on bare metal who want to use GCP services, which I can easily see that being the case, that's definitely an option for them.
I'm still getting up to speed on the in terms of it requires virtual machines as the base unit, I guess, of composability, as opposed to containers.
So I think that at least with Bosh and Cloud Foundry, what you would end up doing is you'd still be running a lot of that on top of an operating system, right?
Yeah.
It can still be your own
Sure.
physical hardware,
Right.
but you're still going to be relying on an operating system there. The thing that, from my perspective, makes it seem a little bit closer to, say, Docker or containerized workloads is the concept of build packs within Cloud
Right.
Foundry. So you have the underlying infrastructure where you've got a machine, it could be a virtual machine or a physical machine, and then the Bosh CPI to manage the lifecycle of those systems, and then the applications that developers would deploy onto Cloud Foundry get bundled together into these build packs that then get handed off to the platform in terms of running your application instances. So that sounds kind of at a high level, very similar to containers, where you bundle all the runtime dependencies in for your application
Sure.
into a container. It's just the difference of, do you hand that container off to something like Kubernetes or Mesos, or do you use Cloud Foundry and the build pack system for that, which it also runs containers. So it gives you that sort of flexibility for an application developer to not care about the operating system. So from that perspective, I don't think that a developer really cares anymore, regardless of which of these systems they're using. Am I using a Debian system, or is it Windows or whatever, right? They don't care about the OS at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives them that freedom for any of these platforms. But it is opinionated. All of them are opinionated. But once you do pick one, right, as long as it's portable and it can run on different clouds or it can run on premise, then you avoid all of that lock-in. It gives you the flexibility to move things around, but your developers don't have to relearn new technologies as you redeploy where you're running Cloud Foundry.
Now,
for
what about in
instance.
a multi-host environment, right? If you're running on AWS and Google and maybe your own data center, how do you maintain that persistence?
So I think generally the way that you would probably do that with Cloud Foundry is run separate Cloud Foundry deployments. There's probably ways that you could look at like tying the networking and stuff together. We did actually do a talk at this on Spring 1 where we had 2 separate Cloud Foundry installations on 2 different zones within GCP fronted by a global load balancer. And so then based on what you were targeting, what DNS zone you were targeting for your deployment, you could either deploy to one Cloud Foundry installation, another one, or both simultaneously. So you could think, although we did that on Google in 2 different regions, you could probably do that very same thing across different clouds or on-prem and a cloud. A little bit more probably networking nuance details you'd have to work out for sure.
Colleen, what's the context for your work related to that question that I just posed about this multi-host environment?
I mean, again, just because of the portability of the service broker, it can be run in any of those installations. You know, if you have 3 different CF deployments, each on a different cloud provider, you can add the service broker to each one, and it'll still work just fine.
What are you working on that to help enhance that, kind of that enhance that and reduce the complexity? I know it's a complex issue for a lot of people who are operators trying to figure all that out. I mean, because you could have different environments. These are different environments. There's different monitoring, questions that you might have in these different in these different scenarios. So, what are some of the things that you're working on that are part of like the overall development to be able to run, more efficiently on multi-host environments?
That's a really good question, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the service broker at this point is really
meant for that.
Well, it's not that it's not meant for being run in a multi-cloud environment or anything like that. It's just that I don't think that that's really the sort of the purpose of. That's not necessarily what it helps you with. I think maybe some of the log aggregator work or something else that we're doing would be more along those lines.
I think it brings the nature of portability, right, to an application developer. So in the scenario that we were talking about where you'd have a Cloud Foundry install on Google and one on Amazon, a developer could write an application that maybe uses BigQuery, right, one of Google's services, and regardless of which Cloud Foundry deployment that application gets hosted on, it still has access to BigQuery. So it gives you that sort of portability of your applications.
That makes sense. You know, that really about sums it up for us. Is there anything you guys would like to add? I mean, we're still learning a lot about these technologies and how they work, and I think a lot of people are just trying to figure them out. But I think you guys explained them pretty well, unless there's anything else you'd like to add at this point.
I'd kind of like to, plug the service broker. It's going to be available on GitHub in the Google Cloud Platform organization or whatever the term for that is this week.
Okay.
And then available on PivNet soon. And I would love to hear feedback from the community.
Great. How can they, I guess they can go to GitHub to participate. Do you have any other information you can add that we're publishing this pretty quickly, so.
Yeah. I would suggest for now just going to GitHub and filing issues. I'll add a mailing list or something so that people can kind of communicate directly. But yeah, I'm mostly going to be probably looking to GitHub for what are people looking for, what needs to change.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank Cloud Foundry, our sponsor for these podcasts from Cloud Foundry Summit in Frankfurt, Germany. Cloud Foundry gives companies the speed, simplicity, and control they need to develop and deploy applications faster and easier. It's open source, easy to iterate, and built to scale. Learn more at cloudfoundry.org.